Our next speaker has crammed an amazing amount of things into his life. Absolutely brilliant. He was in the army at the age of 15 and he pursued a career as an architect. He's been divorced, he's been a single parent, a cleaner, a washer-upper. He's also been an odd job man and so much more. He's even run the London Marathon twice, which is brilliant. He had a bout of unemployment before joining the voluntary sector, where he rescued charities and he actually turned them into really successful organisations. He's now embarked on what he calls his 6th career as a professional speaker and a writer, with 2 books and 4 more planned, which is amazing. Please welcome one of the PSA's co-director of First Impressions, the one and only Mike Daligan.
In starting, I'd like to say a couple of thank yous to the people here that helped me over the last 18 months. Ailey, Michael, Nikki, Sarah. I'm just going through. If I miss anybody, please, Simon, Heather, Alan, Paul, and those who aren't here, Chris. Been very supportive and said some really kind things which have actually got through my prickly shell, and they've been much appreciated. But first, a big thank you actually to Mindy, because when I did my first talk, I thought it went quite well, and I think it did, and there were some positive comments. Mindy trod where other people were feared to tread, which is what I do actually. And she actually commented on the fact that really a pair of Levi's and a white t-shirt was not perhaps the best look. Who the hell did she think she was? Who the hell did she think she was telling me how to dress? Well, Mindy, you were right, and I was very, very wrong. Look, this is my 3rd suit in the last 6 months. My wife wonders when I'm going to stop buying them because she's never seen me in a suit, other than the birthday suit. But what's important is not the external look great. I mean, I now remember what it used to feel like to feel good in a suit, and I'd forgotten that. What's important is not the external. It's what changed in me to make me realise that wearing a suit was quite acceptable and fine. It didn't have to be jeans and a t-shirt. And that's what I want to talk about today. It's what I call the real big society, what David Cameron could have had if he'd used his brain. And it's about perception, it's about reality, and it's about making a change. Because that's important. Most of us judge everything in life by perception. I, for my sins, am a Tottenham supporter. I think they're the best team in the country. They're patently obviously not, are they? So, and I'd like to start with, it's a young boy's first day at grammar school, and the headmaster holds the first year back at assembly to give them a short lecture. And one of the things he tells them is that they, the first year, are not allowed to speak in the lunch hour while they're eating. Well, we fast forward 3.5 hours, and the headmaster walks in, full gown, into the dining room, and the first year are just inside the door, and one young boy is speaking. Name, boy? Daligan, sir. My study, 1:30. And I get the cane on the first day and a short lecture in which he tells me I won't make a living out of talking. Well, actually, it was true, because I'm not making a decent living out of it at the moment. But he couldn't understand that that was a possibility. And he finished up, as I understand it, in an institution, which I like to think was punishment for failing to recognise such obvious talent. I, as you will have noticed, am still talking. In fact, I've probably not stopped. It's 60 years just over since that happened. I now have 3 children. Well, to the best of my knowledge, I have 3 children. And I've been married twice. My first marriage was unhappy. We managed to make it last for 14 years. I married my first serious girlfriend, and that's what you did in those days. My second marriage to a fairly unusual woman. She is literally the most quietly determined person I've ever met in my life. She would not take no for an answer. And I am now happily married. We've been married for 20 odd years. And the days get better, I have to say that, and that's not romanticism. My days get better. And I've learnt with her what a relationship was. I didn't know what a relationship was, and I can talk about why that might be. And no wonder I had so many and they all went badly wrong. Well, I've no intentions of getting wrong on this one, and it gets better. As Nikki said, I'm now in my 6th career writing and public speaking. I've got 2 books published, one, The Real Big Society, the other one I brought with me, the autobiography. I've got copies if anybody wants, 25% off today, The Other Side of the Doors. And I've just been recommended to apply, and I have applied for an MA in creative writing at the University of Middlesex, where my youngest daughter is doing a BA in the same subject. When I burst in and told her what wonderful news, she didn't seem as enamoured as I was. I can't quite work that one out, but never mind. The journey for me has been in stages, marked by fairly traumatic events, to be honest. I didn't see them as traumatic, they were just life, you get on with it. And contentment, and also even now, it's a fairly cautious contentment, has come much later on in life. I've still driven, and there are times when that's a nuisance. I think before I was driven, I probably had hair. And I finished up after all those jobs that Nikki talked about in the voluntary sector, where I rescued charities and ran them. And I love the voluntary sector. It's very innovative, right? There are more regulations concerning it than any business. And I was interested, a business leader said to me the other day, the chief executive of a charity has far more to deal with than any business chief executive. That was really heartening, because I believe that to be so. And what's lovely about it is I was directly involved in helping people at the bottom end to change their lives. And they did. And it changed my life at the same time. And I was reminded that I'm the lucky generation. We were the lucky generation, my generation. We were the product of a decent welfare state and a decent education system. We were actually, without exaggerating too much, read The Real Big Society for the history side, we were actually the recipients of 300 years of history where working people at the bottom end worked hard and played a very, very active role in the civic society in which they were part. No longer so. Well, 2 years ago, I was at a meeting at the founder members of the Federation of City Farms, of which I was one. Apart from the fact I was amazed we were all still alive, which was quite stunning, it was good to see those same people still, most at retirement age or past, still working and still trying to put their ideas into fruition. The afternoon session was where we were talking about the future, what we were going to do. Not what we'd done, what we were going to do. Not Bruce Springsteen's glory days, the plans for the future. It was one of the most life-affirming weekends I've ever had, until I got back and Spurs lost to Manchester City in the last minute, and I was brought up very quickly into reality. Tracy, who organised it, said afterwards, you people in this movement are warm-hearted, generous, community-minded, and you've seen the effect of change in both you and other people, and that's why you work too hard to make it work. She said to me when I spoke to her months afterwards, she'd never been to a meeting before where complete strangers gave her a big hug and a kiss in the first 2 minutes. She said it seemed a wonderful way to start a meeting. Well, that pattern in my early life set up rootlessness, it set up an unhappiness, it set up a discontent, but it also set up what I thought was my complete, you chuck anything at me, I'll deal with it. What I couldn't do was believe I had any role in changing it. And that has happened in the last year, largely due to a lot of people in this room who I've mentioned. Army life, don't go there. Regimentation, social stratification, and being given orders. Don't work for me, don't work. Didn't want to be there, didn't like it. And I left to pursue a civilian career as an architect, by which time I was married with 2 children. I was the only ex-boy soldier, as we were called, who ever got out before the 22 years were up. I'm rather proud of that fact. So I started off in this architect's office thinking, wow, made it. Within 3 months, I was bored sick. Is this it? Churning out drawings? There's got to be more to life than this. And I remember looking up and there was this whole row of doors, which is why the title of the book. There was this whole row of doors in front of me. And the other side of those doors were people doing the things that I wanted to do. And all those doors were locked. And I didn't have a key. Well, the key arrived. My wife met someone else, we divorced. And that was the day that the rest of my life changed. And perhaps that's why I feel that a disadvantage is just an opportunity you haven't really recognised yet. Well, my kids and I moved to Harrogate, to North Yorkshire, to a fairly run-down terraced house so I could become a full-time architectural student. I got involved in community activity straight away, and in my mid-30s engaged in some sex and drugs and rock and roll. I'd been married, so that didn't figure in the previous part. Interestingly, I remember being sat down at the drawing board in the living room one day doing some college work, and I did literally look behind me. The doors. I'd got through those doors. And I didn't know how. I was in an environment where I could thrive and people trusted me. That was the difference. Anyway, that boredom went on for some considerable time. And then I eventually got involved in the voluntary sector. And I then moved to London 10 years later to another charity, and it was a bad move. Within 18 months I was sacked, I had a breakdown, I was burgled, I had a serious car accident, and my relationship ended. And I woke up at 44 that morning thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? I've got 2 mortgages. And the other person kicked in again, picks up the phone, and within 24 hours I was back on the drawing board that I'd left 12 years previously. Again, I was bored. And I thought, I've got to do something, this can't go on like this. So I went into therapy for many, many years. A lovely man, Dan Toomey. And as a result, I'm a much easier person to live with. But I'm still driven. Importantly, I'm doing all things I never dreamt I would do when I was the other person. But the boredom carried on, and if only I'd known what was around the corner, maybe I wouldn't have been so bored, because the charity world opened up again, and the last charity was an even better one than the previous one. So what is that society I believe in? Well, it's fairly straightforward. Like Barack Obama, and I suspect millions of others, I believe you shouldn't be measured by how much money you earn, but how much you contribute, how much you help other people. I think today, certainly in England, we live in a society where greed and avarice seem to be our driving forces. And I want sharing and caring. We have one where the lowest common denominator figures. I want the highest common factor. It don't seem to me to be rocket science. And I'm reminded of listening to the radio 2 years ago when there was a guy on, he was a journalist. He didn't say what paper he was from, but if you listen to the comment, you'll read the paper. I hope you don't read that particular one. And he said, we always knew the editorial line. It was someone somewhere out there today is enjoying themselves, and it's our job to put a stop to it. And I'm appalled at the cynicism in that remark. What sort of mind can think of that? And then I see all these people on phone hacking going in and out of Southwark Court and their friends, and I understand why that happens. And I look at the people I know, and I understand why I see things differently. Can I give you examples? Yeah, loads of them. When I set up the City Farm in Leeds, it had been going for 6 months. I took up the job. I was unemployed, and as all of us were, it was a job creation scheme for the charity. And it had no gas, no electricity, no water, no toilet, no main drainage, and no access road. 6 years later, we built it while we were running it. And 6 years later, it was probably the best project of its sort in the country. Jane Howson was our youth worker. And Jane was a very formidable single parent. What is it about formidable single parents? She came in one day in our usual uniform, was a pair of cut-down denims and a T-shirt to get us a shed. And she said, I'm going to get you a shed today. It was what she was not wearing under the T-shirt that was fairly noticeable. And one of the building team commented, she was as sharp as a needle, do you want your shed or not? And she drove off and she came back 2 hours later. She said, there's a 30-foot by 15-foot shed being flat packed, being delivered. Tomorrow morning, Mike, there's a toilet, so we can go to the toilet decently. The other one was Ralph. Ralph was about 16. He was not far short of 6 foot tall. He had fingers like pork sausages, and he was violent. I had 2 options. He was either going to be urinating in or urinating out. I knew which that had to be, and I knew that I couldn't back off that, so I started working with Ralph. It wasn't easy. He then went into a young offenders institute, and he came back about a year later, and the kids were saying, just you wait. Ralph's back next week, boy, are you going to get it. And I was in the office, we always kept the door open, I was in the office and it went dark. Oh, bloody hell, what's happened here? Ralph was in the doorway, filling the doorway. And he came up to me and he handed me an envelope and he said, Mike, they wouldn't let me spend the money you sent me, but thanks anyway. Ralph then worked for the project on the building team. Nobody ever vandalised anything that Ralph had ever done, or anybody else ever again. But I always knew if I drove in the morning, we'd had a building materials display or delivery, because someone would have a new fence in the local street. Stephen was a young lad, he was about 20. He had a stutter so bad that it would take him minutes to get a sentence out. Could he work with us? Of course he could. His social worker brought him down. And he worked on our market garden for some months. She rang me one day, say he won't be in tomorrow. He's got an assessment panel. He has one every year. And he went in, she rang me the following day, and it gives me goosebumps even today. She said, I don't know what you've done at that farm, but it's a miracle. She said, Stephen went in to the panel and they asked him what he wanted to do. And every year for the last 4 years, he's looked at his boots and not said a word. She said he managed to say, I want to be a gardener. That still makes me feel good. Mill Lane Horticultural Training Centre in Camden, North London. In 1991, there's a Christopher Hill book called The World Turned Upside Down. Well, it was in Camden for that short 8 months, and the world was a better place for it. This group of people with learning difficulties and special needs needed a horticultural training centre, so they came to our charity where we helped homeless people build their own homes, and we worked with them. And they built that centre. That wasn't the important bit. The important bit was Stephen finished up supervising the so-called normal volunteers, and none of them realised that he had learning difficulties. Unrealised talent. Now, I love grand designs. It gives me the opportunity to scream at the television. Of these, you know, there are two of them with one son or one daughter. They build this 50-bedroom mansion. They don't actually build it, they get a builder in. They go over budget, they make every mistake, and then daddy bails them out. And they've never realised that they've made a mistake. Look, it's wonderful, isn't it? No, it's awful, actually. There's a different Grand Designs. Watch it. Grand Designs Revisited when they go back. One of them was Hedgehog Self-Build. It was a scheme I had an involvement with. 12 people, 12 unemployed and homeless families building their own homes, which they did over a period of 2 years. They went back. Those 12 families have now grown. They're all employed. They're all living in those same houses, and because of the technology, they've easily been able to extend them as their families have grown. They asked one woman, have you thought of leaving? She said, what? This is paradise, this is everything I want. And her daughter, off camera, said something about, my mum built her own home. What aspirations does that give me? Now, I know people are going to say to me, yeah, Mike, that's your dream world, and it does happen occasionally, but not real. Well, let me point out to you that according to the BBC, about a month ago, Manchester United, in what I consider to be the temple of vanity and greed, professional football at the top level, Manchester United dropped out of the 3 richest clubs in the world. They are now Barcelona, Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich, as is required by law in Germany, needs to be 51% member-owned. Barcelona is member-owned. Real Madrid is member-owned. And by the way, they also produce some of the world's best football. So, owned by its members, richest and best quality. We could really use that as a model for our society. It's not, and it's happening. It's not a dream. When I left boy service at 18 to go into the regular army, we had to collect our reports and we all had to march up, and they read out bits, and they chose to read bits out of mine, and it said, and I quote, carved in my heart, Daligan tends to take the easy way out unless the effort will bring speedy personal reward. Absolute nonsense. But the army treats you badly, I behave badly. What do you expect? Treat me differently, I'll behave differently. Which brings me to my final bit, which is about creating an environment in which these things can happen. I went to one talk where I was talking about helping homeless people to build their own homes, and the vicar said to me, where do these amazing people come from, Mike? They're homeless. And I said, watch a wildlife programme. You can still watch it on YouTube today. Watch a wildlife programme, and what happens is the narrator's out in the desert, and he's actually saying, it only rains here once every 10 years, and it's barren. At which time, of course, they've timed it just right. The heavens open, there's a flood, and the earth is nourished. And that narrator comes back about 3 weeks later. There are flowers, there are plants. That desert is blooming. There are bees around the plants. There are insects around the bottom. There are lizards coming along to eat the insects. There's a whole ecosystem, a whole environment there working. And I pointed out to the vicar, the people I work with are just like that. They've been under that dry, barren earth for 10 years, just waiting for the right conditions. If you create the conditions, then you can get those results. It's up to us whether we choose to do it or not. I think I'm an example of what happens when you do create those conditions. Thank you very much.